So welcome to Module 2, starting the journey toward home. If we're going to help PJ as real estate professionals find his way home, we need to have a thorough and complete understanding of the journey that it's taken us to get here. Because it's not just PJ's journey toward home that's a long one. The long road home applies to all of us. In fact, I find it surprising that so many people take for granted the fair housing protections and the laws in the United States that protect people in protected classes. That's because a lot of people think it's been that way forever, and it hasn't. I don't know that you've ever heard of an individual named Alec de Tocqueville, but Alec de Tocqueville was a French philosopher who lived in the mid-1800s. And around 1850, he came to the United States from France. His assignment at the time was to visit the United States, take a look at our culture, visit many of our major cities and rural areas, and determine what it is that uniquely makes us Americans. De Tocqueville's work on that subject is a leading textbook and treatise today called Democracy in America. It was a work written in the 1850s, and to put it in historical context, you need to understand that the United States at that point was just a little over 75 years old. And at age 75, there were still a lot of people in Europe and in other countries who were wondering just who are those Americans. De Tocqueville's book attempted to answer that question. And if you've ever studied law or taken a political science course, you may have read that book or used it as a textbook. The amazing point isn't that de Tocqueville first coined the phrase, the melting pot of the United States in his book. It's the work that came later. Because just a few short years ago, another French philosopher, a guy by the name of Bernard-Henri Lévy, visited the United States. And Mr. Lévy followed in the footsteps of de Tocqueville. He visited every major city, every state. He visited many rural areas. And his assignment was to conclude whether in today's complicated and advanced world, whether the things that de Tocqueville said about being an American and being this great melting pot was still true. I'll save you the suspense. The conclusion of his journey and his research was that the work done by Tocqueville is probably just as valid today as when it was done in 1850. Except to hear a man like Bernard-Henri Lévy talk about us as Americans would give you a whole new perspective on who we are and what the protections are that we afford in our laws. I saw him on a couple of the morning talk shows following his journey where he was interviewed. And he turned to the host and he said, I've never been to America before. I've heard about it. I, of course, read about it. We do have newspapers and news channels in Europe regarding the United States. But it wasn't until I got here that I realized it's the only place on the planet where you guys believe you can grow an American. Now, the host was a little uncertain as to what Mr. Lévy was talking about. And Mr. Lévy went on to say that, no, you see, in the United States, different from anywhere else in the world, people come here from all different kinds of races, religions, nationalities. But within a very short time of coming to the United States, they're all running around saying, "We Americans." They instantly include themselves in the group. And he explained that that was a phenomenon that only occurs here. He tried to analogize it to his own country. He said, let me give you an example. If you move to France and you live there for 20 years, and at the end of 20 years you run up and down the street saying, "I am a Frenchman," they would laugh at you. Because normally we claim national identity and heritage based on where we were born or based on where our parents were born. He said in the United States, people claim allegiance just because they live here. And you're somehow able to take these people from all these different cultures, religions, backgrounds, and blend them into a unified person known as an American. He talked about sitting with a group of college students on the library steps in Los Angeles And he said during the whole conversation, since they were Islamic, they kept referring to "we believe" and "it's our principles that." And he said, given his European background, the whole time that they talked, he thought they were talking about we as Islamic people. He said it was only halfway through the conversation when he realized that having been here only a very short time, they were already referring to we and meaning we as Americans. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And if you'd like to know more about it, I encourage you to pick up de Tocqueville's book, or I encourage you in today's technologically savvy world to go to YouTube and search for Henri Levy, and you'll hear some of his insights. But it's looking at us through the eyes of real people in the world. So whether we're talking about French philosophers in the 1850s or today, or whether we're talking about the historic journey of a boat called the Amistad, the truth of the matter is that nothing we have here in the United States in terms of protections and fair housing came easily. For way too many people, it's been a long road home.
First detained by officers of a survey brig off the coast of Long Island. I can only assume that the charge is murder.
We do hereby claim salvage on the high seas of the Spanish ship La Amistad and all her cargo.
Your Honor!
Here are the true owners of these slaves.
These slaves, Your Honor, are by rights the property of Spain.
You and this young so-called lawyer have proven you know what they are. They're Africans. Congratulations. What you don't know is who they are.
This could take us all one long step closer to civil war.
Immediately surrender!
Our president has appealed the decision to our Supreme Court. We have to try the case again.
I will call into the past and beg my ancestors to come and help me, so that this moment I am the whole reason they have existed at all.
This is the most important case ever come before this court. Because what it in fact concerns is freedom, the very nature of man. And the proof is the length to which a man will go to regain it once taken. He will break loose his chains. He will decimate his enemies. He will try and try and try against all odds, against all prejudices, to get home.
So what does the Amistad have to do with people getting home today? You know, that clip you just watched is a historic piece of true footage from something that actually happened in American history. And I don't show it to you to belittle us as a country, quite the contrary. I share it with you to show you just how far we've come. But there are a couple of quotes in that clip that you just watched that I think should stand out to you as much as they did to me. And the first one was when John Quincy Adams says, very good, you've managed to identify what they are. What you haven't figured out yet is who they are. You know, sometimes in regard to fair housing, I think we still do that. And some of us may initially have made that mistake with PJ. We take the arbitrary categories and classifications and we immediately drop people in to those categories and instantly begin creating labels and preconceptions regarding them. We're able to identify what they are. We're less good at getting to know who people are. The other telling quote from that movie clip is the one at the very end, talking about the lengths with which people will go to get home. And the clip struck me so profoundly that when I was interviewing PJ, I thought I would ask him about what he thought the journey home would look like for him and what he was willing to do. I want to let him share that with you.
In effort to answer your question, what should real estate agents take into consideration when helping people with disabilities? Number one, passion. The passion and the drive of the disabled person who wants what they want. When we as human beings see something that we want, we're willing to go pretty far distances to acquire it. And that's important to take into consideration. And we're willing to modify and shape and change our lives to get what we want, to allow us to feel more normal and more able-bodied. And so that's important to take into consideration. How badly does someone want it, and how willing at that point are they willing to modify their lives to get what they want to get.
So if you were diligent in answering the questions while you watched the last clip, let's talk about them. How does PJ with a disability really want to be treated? You know, what I hear him saying, and what you probably heard him saying as well, is that he's just a person trying to buy a home, and he'd like to be treated just like everyone else. You know, we've heard that time and time again. You may have heard it in previous fair housing classes, that we're supposed to treat people fairly, and we're supposed to be treating people equally. At least that's what PJ believes at this point in his transaction. We're going to challenge that assumption as we move forward and ask some really hard questions regarding it. If I were to ask you, what is he looking for more than anything else from his real estate professional, then I think what you heard PJ say was passion. He wants someone who really cares about his purchase and someone who has a real interest in helping him obtain a home. I want you to think back to the very, very first home you ever bought. And I want you to try to isolate some of the reasons why buying that home was important to you. You know, despite everything we learn in pre-licensing class and in sales training about real estate transactions, I think PJ really is cut right to the heart of it all. What everyone is looking for from us as real estate professionals is a passion and a dedication to believe in them and what they are trying to do as much as if we were doing it for ourselves. Maybe that's what being a professional and protecting and promoting the interest of clients is really all about anyhow. So I have to ask you, what's the most passionate thing you ever did for a client? And then I want you to ask yourself a harder question. Did you do it with the same level of intensity, commitment, and belief as if you'd have been doing it for yourself? You know, whether we're talking about the people such as PJ with us in the contemporary world, whether we're talking about the works of great philosophical people like de Tocqueville or Dr. Levy, or whether we are talking about the folks that were aboard the Amistad, you know, all of these people really wanted was a guide to get them home. Here's some more insights from PJ regarding that.
We didn't pursue the house thing immediately, but we started to talk about it more and more and more. And over the next couple months, we really started to look at it more seriously. Like, okay, if you really want to do this, then let's look into it. You know, and so it took a series of conversations over a couple weeks, 3 weeks maybe, before we actually decided, okay, let's jump in and do this. Admittedly, he had some issues that he had to deal with me also, which were, I have commitment issues. You know, like I want to do something, and then I'm like, well, I don't know, that sounds like a big deal to me. I don't know if I really want to do that. And so, you know, so he had to get me to the point where, okay, am I serious about buying a house? Because if I'm not, then, he has other clients to work on too. And so we both had to come to a happy medium where, this is what I want as a normal human being, despite I have a disability, or in fact that I have taking into consideration that I have a disability, but also I had to get through some issues which were, I need to actually commit to buying a house if I'm going to do this, because I'm asking someone to do work up front before they get paid on the back end.
So I have to ask you, do you think that PJ is correct that this process is going to be just like it is with any other buyer? I mean, he starts out by telling us he wants us to treat him exactly like everyone else. But the fact of the matter is that PJ comes from a background with some limitations of which even he may not be aware. Do you think PJ is naive in terms of thinking that the transaction will not entail additional hurdles or difficulties or challenges? And finally, do you think either he or his agent really know how much passion it's going to take to get PJ home? Because I'm going to give you some insight and a preview of where we're going down the road in this course. As we progress through PJ's transaction, you're going to see some of the hurdles and some of the objectives which are going to get faced in trying to get PJ home. And if we as real estate professionals can become more aware of some of those hurdles, some of those challenges, and some of those obstacles that are going to exist, then we can do a much better job of trying to correct the client's expectations up front at the beginning of the transaction. In fact, it all got me to wondering, just what expectations does PJ have going forward? So I asked him.
I think probably one of the biggest areas that I found Charlie having to deal with me was I just didn't understand the house buying process. I didn't understand all the paperwork, and I didn't understand all the people that were going to go in. And I understood that because he told it to me, but it didn't mean anything to me because I'd never bought a house before. And so, my ancestry is, I hope I'm not offensive to anybody, but my ancestry is Jewish and Catholic, so I was born with so much guilt that I can't even explain it, right? That's why I'm largely Buddhist, because the Buddhists don't believe in guilt. However, anytime I had to ask him, the people that come in and look at the house and they do an assessment, like the assessor, is no, the inspector. I was oh yeah. It's a simple word, right? We know what an inspector is, but I forgot it every time I needed to use it. Good thing I took 13 months to buy this house because eventually I got it, but I didn't understand all of that stuff. I didn't think about certain time parameters. I didn't know those kinds of things. I'm just a first-time home buyer, so I guess there's not really any difference. But in addition to the fact that you're having to deal with my disability and stretching your brain to think about things for me that you might not have thought about before, or should I ask them this question, or how do I ask them that question? If they're coming to you and want to buy a home and you're uncomfortable talking to the person with the disability because you've never done it before but you're willing to work with them, simply say, hey, can I ask you a few questions? And if I ask you questions that are too personal, tell me, but I'll explain to you why I'm asking you those questions. But because you're having to maybe wrap your brain around a new lifestyle, because you might be lifting people in and out of cars, because you might be putting your elbow out so that a blind person might be able to put their arm around your arm and follow you in, okay? Because of certain things like that, the additional questions that your normal people ask you, you might be oh my gosh, you have another question? Please just understand that we're probably buying our first home too.
Okay, so now I'm really confused. In watching that last clip, I heard PJ say that now he wants us to represent him, taking into account the fact that he has a disability. Do you remember earlier when I said I was going to take you on a journey in this course and we were going to change some fundamental perceptions that we all have about working with fair housing? And I also said that PJ's initial expectations of us and what he was looking for in the transaction might not square with the way that things actually worked out. Because you see, initially, although he tells us that he wants to be treated just like everyone else, it sounds to me like he's now changing that. He's saying that he wants us to take into account the fact that he has a disability and treat him differently than some other clients who may not. Do you think PJ's expectations are properly set in this transaction? And what would you do to change some of the perceptions and set the groundwork for those expectations right up front? Do you think that both he and his agent are going to need to change and make some adjustments? I guarantee you, both PJ and his agent are in for a learning curve in helping someone with a disability in getting home. And we're going to find out just how challenging that can be in later modules. But you know, the truth of the matter is that if you want to see change in the world, then we have to be the change that we want to see. I'm going to end this module with sharing with you a song and a video clip that will drive that point home.
Everywhere you look, you can write a book on what's going on. Everyone you know's got to reap what they sow, be it right or wrong. Ghetto's flood, there's a hole up in the sky. Oil and blood, tell me why, oh why. Terror struck, look at us, this isn't what we planned. You gotta take a stand, don't forget that pride always goes before the fall. And nobody's free till there's freedom for all. As you sow, so shall you reap. Be the change that you want to see. Oh yeah. Be the change that you want to see. Every now and then you gotta bend to the way it is. But be that as it may, it's not the way just 'cause they say it is.